What's up everybody, welcome back to my channel, and today we are going to be diving into Dune, and there's not a lot that I'm going to be able to say that hasn't been said already. I thought it was a stunning film, a real kind of sci-fi epic. I personally don't have any history with the original film or the book. I've started reading the books now that I've seen the film. I've seen a couple of clips of the original film, namely Patrick Stewart holding a pug and that awful CGI during the training scene between Paul and Gurney, so I'm not particularly compelled to go and watch that version. It's a fantastic world-building film that doesn't feel excessively expositional. Obviously there's got to be a certain level of exposition, but one thing I've always liked about Denis Villeneuve's films is that he kind of trusts the audience and layers his details within implication rather than kind of obvious explication. I understand that a lot of people kind of felt the ending was a bit inconclusive and anticlimactic. I personally really liked where the film ended from a character point of view. Obviously narratively it does feel incomplete, and that's because it is incomplete, but especially from Paul Atreides' perspective, concluding with that 1v1 duel is really the kind of fulfillment and completion of his kind of arc of independence. This film is all about him kind of grappling this idea of destiny and this destiny that other people are projecting onto him, whereas this kind of final 1v1 combat scene is all about him taking helm of his own destiny. And it's the first instance in the film where characters are no longer sacrificing themselves for him, he is fighting for his own life there. So the film ends with this new sense of identity and independence, and really does complete Paul's arc within a standalone film, even though the broader narrative is still ongoing. I'm always really fascinated by the visual style of Denis Villeneuve's films. He does all these kind of vast, expansive shots, layered with detail but in such a simplistic way. It's hard to describe, but all of his films feel quite visually empty while feeling multi-layered at the same time. That doesn't make sense, but it's the only way I can really describe it. A score from Hans Zimmer is never going to let you down, and here it's especially phenomenal. The way he uses voice and vocals to create these different soundscapes for the different clans and houses is really interesting. I loved his kind of inclusion of like Mongolian throat singing and these kind of more spiritual women's voices, as well as his use of bagpipes. I really wasn't anticipating that, but thought that contributed really well to the film. Now, Dune is definitely not without fault. I do have a couple of issues with it, and they were that I think there was definitely an overuse of these kind of vision dreamlike sequences. We just get a lot of these kind of slow-mo shots of Zendaya in the desert that don't come across as particularly profound or necessary, and do become a bit numbing after a while because they do become very heavily frequent and don't really add much to it. It's all about Paul Atreides coming to terms with these gifts and powers he might have. But ultimately I found that they had very little to offer, and quite a lot of the times it would pull you out of a really interesting sequence. But my main gripe with this film, and this extends to a couple of visionary directors like Chris Nolan and Denis Villeneuve, is that I don't respond that well to the way that they decide to shoot their action. Now, with Blade Runner 2049, I thought there was a real kind of cold, surgical and emotionless precision to the way that he structured and shot his fight sequences that really added to this idea of like replicants fighting, and I thought it served the film's purpose really well. But in this film there were a few times where I just felt that the action didn't seem as intense as it needed to be, and I'm not sure whether that's partly the 12A rating. Obviously it can't be too brutal. I think part of it was to do with the body shields, like the technology that they use in the film, where a lot of the impacts obviously feel quite muffled and stifled rather than like visceral, but just some of the action scenes didn't feel as intense as they needed to be. Namely the kind of 1v1 sequence at the end of the film. Obviously the stakes are there, the importance of it at a character level is there, but the actual visual portrayal of it was missing something for me. But the one redeeming aspect of the action, and I'd say the MVP of the film, is Jason Momoa's Duncan Idaho. He gets the majority of the action in this film, and that rarely disappoints. He's got such a physicality, and even though he's quite a peripheral character in the film, he kind of weaves in and out at varying points. I'd say he's definitely the character that the entire film hinges on in a way. He just brings a real kind of balance of determination, like warmth and sheer force of will. And speaking of kind of character impacts, I think all of the Atreides family are really well fleshed out and kind of established as a really fascinating family unit. Oscar Isaac's brilliant as Duke Leto. Rebecca Ferguson really comes into her own later on in the film. I thought at first all she really does in the film is cry, but then in like the second half she gets a lot more to do. And Timothée Chalamet never fails to deliver. He really brings that sense of inner conflict, a struggle of someone wrestling with their kind of political future and their personal future, as well as this more spiritual destiny. Characters who don't make an impact, presumably because they're going to feature more heavily in part 2, are like Javier Bardem as Stilgar, Zendaya as Chani, Dave Bautista as Raban. Stellan Skarsgård was brilliant as the Baron. I just again think we didn't get enough of him, or kind of we didn't explore his motives and that enough. He's more just this kind of grotesque two-dimensional villain in this film. It feels weird to say, but it's also just really refreshing to watch a film where a lot of important characters die. It was just a relief to watch a film where directors weren't afraid to kill off characters for the sake of preserving a franchise. And that really helped to establish the stakes in this film. I thought the production design and the costume design for this film were absolutely transcendental. The colours were never really vivid or intrusive, but they had a real crispness that just added to this very distinct aesthetic style that Denis brings to his films. For a film that has to do a lot of world building without much action, it didn't often struggle. I thought the first hour and a half really flew. It was only in the final hour that it started to drag. But I think that's only because when you have the brunt of the action in the middle chunk of the film, then the third act is always going to feel a bit more like an epilogue and a bit anticlimactic. You know, there's no film rules when it comes to making films. There's nothing that should stop a director doing a climactic battle in the middle of the film. It does have a kind of weird effect on the pace. But what it does in this film is it really isolates Paul Atreides and his mother. Characters who have been used to wealth and privilege, finally kind of stripped of everything and having to reconcile with their new reality of having nothing. So overall, Dune is a phenomenal cinematic experience, and it should be a cinematic experience. I can't emphasize that enough. And Denis Villeneuve really blends a sense of historical epic with futuristic sci-fi in a very cohesive and successful manner. It's definitely not a pitch perfect film, but it's a film that's so rich, so layered, and it's going to be so rewarding on the rewatch. I think it's one of those films that's going to be better the more you watch it, like Blade Runner 2049, like Arrival. But let me know what you guys thought of the film. Please drop anything in the comments below, and liking and subscribing would be a massive help for me and my channel. But I will see you for my next review. Thanks for watching.